it. Oops, wrong one. Stop sharing. Sorry about that. Let me get the right screen up there. Okay, all right. Well, good morning, everyone. Again, thank you for being here this morning. Excited to share our next steps in our strategic plan with this team. This is our third town hall, and I'm so glad to have such a great audience here. So again, I'm thrilled to share our plan with you, and we are calling this plan All In because this plan has been community inspired and student focused, and it encompasses everyone, and its successful execution will require every person in our community to learn, to teach, and to lead. So I'm thrilled again to share with you more details about this strategic plan, because this plan will bring out the best in our students, our educators, our family, our city, because we are going to be providing even more outstanding inclusive public education for our students in this school system. This plan provides City Schools of Decatur with a clear focus on students as we confront and overcome racial, economic, and social injustices and disparities. The bottom line here is that this plan will ensure CSD can equitably and effectively meet the needs of all of our students. There's a couple things. If you don't remember anything else, here are 5 things that you should know about this plan. First, this plan recenters us on our most precious resource, which is whole student development and doing what is right for our students. Next, we have woven equity into the fabric of everything that we're doing across the district. Equity is no longer an isolated initiative. It is part of what we do each and every day through all of our actions. Third, we're reimagining what school looks like through this plan so that we can meet the needs of all learners. Think of changing how our school day may look for some students, providing enhanced internships for students, and also with a laser focus on making sure that every student is a skilled reader by the end of 3rd grade. Next, the inclusion for all students is central to all of these efforts. We are creating spaces where every student, no matter their grade level, interests, race, gender identity, or ability level, will feel included and like they belong. Finally, this plan was developed with an intentional and holistic process that was led by school and district leaders. We knew for people to be all in, this was critical to collaborate with all of our stakeholders from across Decatur. So this plan is going to guide us towards several non-negotiables that we've established for success. First, as I've already mentioned, we want to make sure that every student is a skilled reader by the time they leave 3rd grade. We know that if we do not invest early and with high intensity with our students so that they can read on grade level by the time they leave 3rd grade, that we'll have to increase interventions as well as with an extended cost for our school district. And I also want to note here for skilled readers, we know that we have students in our school system with some significant intellectual disabilities. And when we talk about a skilled reader, we want it to be the skilled reader for what that student needs. So some of our students may have a different example or a different threshold for what being a skilled reader is, depending on some of their intellectual disabilities. Our second must-have is that our school environments are inclusive for every single student. We want every single student to feel welcome and to feel part of our school and culture. Third, all of our students will be safe, seen, and successful. And then lastly, every student will have a high quality learning environment. We know we have great teachers in our school system, and we want to make sure that regardless of who your child has for a teacher, that is going to be a great teacher. Before we jump into some more of the details, I want to take a little bit of time and talk about our why. We centered this work around the development of the whole learner. But when we started working on this plan, it was back in January 2022, so just over a year ago, and the board completed their self-assessment. And at that point, they identified the need for a new strategic plan as essential for long-term success in City Schools of Decatur. And this is still on the heels of the COVID pandemic. We know we've got a rapidly evolving landscape in the 21st century, and it was believed to be critical to seize that opportunity to reshape schools to meet the needs of each student while we're still supporting the social, emotional, and cognitive needs. As I mentioned before, this plan was developed over the course of a year with intentional inclusion of stakeholder groups, while we were still centering the voices of historically marginalized stakeholders throughout this process. School and district leadership helped lead these holistic and intentional inclusive efforts. As we worked through this plan, we knew there were three core beliefs that we had to hold central to who we are as a school system. First, we as a school system at our core believe in whole learner development. CSD is committed to ensuring social, emotional, and cognitive growth and mental health for each student. We also believe that our schools must unearth the gifts and talents of our students while we adjust to the needs of our students, rather than making our students try to adjust to our system. Our third core belief that we centered was no learner marginalized. When we say all indicator, we mean all, with a deliberate focus on investing in students of color who have been historically marginalized the most. CSD will serve as a national model for anti-marginalization and systemic equity. And finally, we focused on being future-driven. We know that the current school model is something that was developed many, many years ago out of an industrial education model. And those practices and skills and how classrooms were set up has to be updated and changed. So as we went through this plan, we continually asked ourselves, are we preparing students for the adults past, or our students' future? Here's an overview of the timeline that we used to guide us through this plan. As I mentioned, over a year ago, the board charged me to lead the district in development of a new strategic plan. The board selected GSBA and along with them, GLSSI to help facilitate the design of this plan. In late 2022, we started engaging with stakeholders through several opportunities, including our community engagement meeting, a community survey, and bringing stakeholders in to participate in the planning team. One of the crucial pieces of the initial part of this plan was to gather our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats through the SWOT analysis. This information was then convened for review and all of the data that we have as a school system to the planning team. They reviewed the SWOT analysis and helped us build our strategy map. Then this was passed on to the action team, and the action team met to develop our performance measures, initiatives, and action steps. The action team met several times after their initial meeting to finalize their action steps to ensure our plan was ready for implementation for starting in the 2023-24 school year. I also took time to meet with our student advisory group to hear from them to make sure that this plan had the student perspective, and that was at the forefront of what we were building. So I'm going to talk about our what. So how are we going to get this work done? So to achieve these ambitious outcomes we've identified, and in collaboration with our community, CSD identified strategic accelerators that leverage our strength to improve our areas of growth while we're taking advantage of the many opportunities in our community. So we identified initially 5 strategic accelerators, but as I mentioned, we really felt that equity at that point was a separate accelerator, but we needed to weave it into everything that we do. So we turned from 5 accelerators into 4. And these 4 accelerators are building and sustaining an engaging and inclusive culture, organizational effectiveness and excellence, cultivating and retaining quality professionals, and success for students in all areas. And we intentionally put success for students in all areas at the end because we strongly believe that these 3 accelerators will facilitate student success in all areas. So I'm going to take a little bit of time and dig through and give you some more information about each of these strategic accelerators. So this first strategic accelerator, building and sustaining an engaging and inclusive culture. And you'll notice with each of these a similar layout that we have identified an initiative name. And for this one, this is our CSD cultural experience, focusing on connections, culture, and community. And each of these has a purpose and outcomes identified. So the purpose of building and sustaining an engaging and inclusive culture is to ensure that CSD has the systems, processes, and resources in place so that all members of our community report that they feel that they belong and they've got a passion for learning and contributing to the achievement of our vision and mission. We also want all of our community members to report that they feel safe, valued, and heard in all CSD settings and locations. We want everyone to experience a positive culture and climate and see that we value our students, staff, families, and community partners. We want everyone to report having equitable access to extracurriculars, athletics, activities, clubs, and aftercare opportunities. We also want our staff and everyone in our community to report that they feel that they've been well informed and that they're knowledgeable about CSD processes and procedures. Each of our strategic accelerator also has identified additional outcomes that we want to achieve through the implementation of this work. And all of these you will see have the first bullet under outcomes is achieving our priority student outcomes. And I'll be reviewing those after I talk through the rest of the strategic accelerators. Another outcome for this area is we want to make sure that student voice is amplified, that we've intentionally engaged and centered marginalized voices for our students, as well as students overall. We want to make sure that we have rich connections with all stakeholders, expanding and diversifying our offerings and access to athletics, activities, and clubs, and maximizing those community partnerships. Our next strategic accelerator focuses on organizational effectiveness and excellence. And we are calling this initiative the CSD Sustainable Experience for the Future Ready Classroom. The purpose of this is to make sure that we have put the processes, systems, and resources in place so that every City Schools of Decatur classroom, common space, office, and facility is safe and healthy, universally accessible for every member of our community, that we have focused on being eco-friendly and sustainable. We fully equipped all of our spaces with modern technology, and these spaces will be designed to keep students actively engaged in learning. And we also want to always ensure that we have maintained financial sustainability. Some of the outcomes that we have identified for this area is, of course, achieving our priority student outcomes. We want to provide our students the future-ready classroom while we're reducing the environmental burden on our environment. We want to create and sustain excellence and transparency in our financial operations and decisions. We want to make sure every student in our whole system and employee has equitable access to technology resources, as well as implementing an environmental friendly long-range facility plan and enhancing safety and universally accessible learning environments. So our third strategic accelerator is focused on our staff, cultivating and retaining quality professionals. And this initiative we're calling the CSD Staff Experience from Hire to Retire. We want to focus on how do we bring in the best and the brightest and most talented staff members in all areas, and how do we keep them here and make sure we have retained those high quality professionals. In this area, our purpose will be to make sure that CSD has the systems, processes, and resources in place so that all staff members report that they're actively and meaningfully engaged in the work towards the successful achievement of accomplishing our vision and mission. We want to make sure that there's equitable representation at all levels of our organization for various different groups. We also want to make sure our teachers and staff are provided the training, coaching, and resources so they can be highly effective in their role, and that there's opportunities for advancement in every area. We want to compensate our staff at competitive levels, celebrate their successes, and make sure that all of our staff feel highly satisfied in their roles. Again, our outcome here, our first is focusing on our students and making sure we achieve our priority student outcomes. We want CSD to be nationally known as a premier district where staff thrive. We'll continue to use our equitable hiring practices, and we'll be attracting and retaining a diverse human capital, addressing the relevant and appropriate professional currencies, and then also prioritizing and investing in professional development and training to sustain a pervasive equity-focused culture that eliminates bias and racism in all CSD spaces. Our final strategic accelerator is focused on our students in particular, and this is student success in all areas. The initiative here is the student experience, preparing to lead a better world. The purpose of this initiative is to make sure that the systems, processes, and resources are in place so that all students are prepared to successfully take the next step in their life journey at any time during their journey here through CSD and after graduation. We want our students to be aware of the importance of civic engagement and cultural humility. We want our students to, of course, reach the highest levels of academic success. We want to make sure that our students are eager to attend school, they're able to thrive and find joy in every CSD learning space. The outcomes that we want to achieve through implementation of this initiative is to achieve, of course, our priority student outcomes. We'll be providing and delivering an engaging curriculum through quality instruction and equity, increasing mastery of our Standards Plus, providing relevant and meaningful assessments, embedding college and career preparedness in diverse ways, and increasing student wellness. I wanted to give everyone a quick overview as well of how we are really focusing and digging deeper into each of these. So behind each of those strategic accelerators, we have a detailed list of action steps, as well as calendaring out and planning what steps we will implement in which years going forward as a school system. So I mentioned these a couple times, but let's talk about our priority student outcomes. These are high-level outcomes that are crafted to intentionally keep our focus on students as the main purpose of all of our work in City Schools of Decatur. For both priority student outcomes that I'm going to share, we've developed incremental goals for our system to track our progress over time so that we can build upon those to achieve our priority student outcomes. Our first priority student outcome is that we will cultivate scholars to become leaders who live healthy, self-sufficient lives, become lifelong learners, participate in productive civic engagement, and feel fulfilled in their careers. Our second priority student outcome is that we will improve opportunities, access, and classroom environments so that all scholars can achieve high academic results, equitable representation in advanced classes, and equitable discipline outcomes. And this is just a snapshot of one of our priority student outcomes planning tools that we're using to plan out incremental goals and how we are going to measure those, as well as an initial timeline for moving this work forward. So we have been working on developing the implementation plan, so I'm going to go through that shortly. So here we're moving forward. The successful execution of this plan will require everyone in our community to learn, to teach, and to lead. And only through active engagement from all stakeholders will we be able to achieve our priority student outcomes. To ensure that this strategic plan generates the promised student outcomes, our district leaders, our school leaders will be following the steps that we've outlined in Building to Impact, the 5D implementation playbook for educators. It was written by world-renowned educational improvement experts, Aaron Hamilton, Douglas Reeves, Janet Clinton, and John Hattie. Each of the phases that are outlined in this book has an individualized timeline based on the initiative scope. So for example, some initiatives may need a full year in one phase, but may progress through a different phase much quicker. But as the manager for each of these strategic accelerators progress through the implementation phase, we'll be providing updates to the community and board at regularly scheduled strategic planning update meetings that I'll talk about in the next slide. But I want to talk through the cycle very quickly before we move on to that. So this is part of what I think will bring this strategic plan to a very successful outcomes for our school district. The first phase is the discovery phase. This is where we take the initial goals that we have and really dig into those to decide what is it in this goal that's worth pursuing above all else. Building a theory of present, where we'll be taking inventory of what's happening and what's working already, and then agreeing on what success looks like. As I mentioned with being a skilled reader earlier in the presentation, what a skilled reader looks like may be different for some students depending on where they are with their intellectual development. But we also need to come to an agreement on what that looks like for all of our students and make sure that we are working towards the same goal. The second phase is the design phase. And this is where we will systematically examine different options in the design space. We'll be selecting and designing high probability interventions and doing stress testing before we launch. We'll also be developing their monitoring and evaluation plan. And the last part of the design phase is to really take a close look at any initiatives or programs that we will stop doing so that we can make room for new initiatives. The third phase is then putting our agreed upon interventions and initiatives into action. That's where we will also be collecting and monitoring our evaluation data. And as appropriate, we will be using pilot programs to determine if this intervention is worthwhile before we do it as a district-wide initiative and scale it up to impact all students. After we've been in the delivery phase for a while, we'll move into the double back phase. And I think this is a really important part of the phase because we can take a pause and monitor and evaluate the delivery chain to decide where we need to go next in the cycle. The data may necessitate, yep, we're ready to scale up, we're ready to take this all the way forward, or it may say, let's go back and take a look at how we're delivering this. Is it being delivered in the right way in our classrooms? Are we needing to maybe even take a step back to the design phase and figure out additional steps that may need to be put into place? If it is successful and we are ready to move this initiative forward, then we'll go into the double up phase, where we can decide if our intervention or initiative will be continued and maintained at the same level, or we are ready to enhance this and move it forward across the district. As I mentioned, the CSD theory of action has explicitly stated that the board will receive regular updates on the progress being made towards the implementation of this community-inspired, student-centered, and equity-focused strategic plan. We've got a reporting schedule already set, and these are the months where we will be reporting out on a quarterly basis on our progress. This slide shows a quick snapshot of some of the reporting dashboards that we are building. So you can see for the strategic accelerators, we're going to be tracking how many steps are completed, how many are in progress, or how many have not been completed yet. This is also a mock-up of what our priority student outcomes one-page dashboard will look like so that we can report out progress on meeting our goals. And then the last two slides on the right show the project management dashboard that we will be using at the central office to make sure these plans are moving ahead at a timely manner. So that takes us through our strategic plan. And I see we have a couple questions in the Q&A, but I'm going to go ahead and get through the budget presentation as well. And then we'll go through the questions that are sitting in the Q&A box. So first thing I wanted to talk about for the budget is to give a quick overview of what is coming down from the state education budget and what will impact us locally. So it does look like the $2,000 raise for earned certified employees is making its way through the budget process, and that we will pass that on to at least our certified employees, if not to every employee in the school system. Another area that we are getting funding for from the state will be a $50,000 per school one-time safety and security grant. We have 10 schools, so we anticipate getting about $500,000 to use to enhance safety and security measures in the school system. We also are anticipating a $1,000 raise for school nutrition, bus drivers, and custodians. And then the biggest part of the budget that is coming down as an impact for our local school system is what we have to contribute to pay for state healthcare benefits. So previously, they have not changed what school districts have had to pay for healthcare benefits to the state, and it sat at about $940 for many, many years. And it is significantly impacting, increasing up to $1,580 per month per staff member. So this is going to be a significant impact to our budget. They are phasing this in over 2 years, but this is something that is really going to change the landscape of our budget. So I want to talk about what we're projecting for our revenue for the upcoming budget. So we are projecting the state to give us about $830,000 to increase the pay for the rate of $2,000 for our earned certified employees. And let me clarify what that means. So funding for schools from the state level is based on our student enrollment and the services that those students get. And that funding sends us money to pay for staff to use those to implement those services. And based on our student enrollment and based on the services that those students have, we earn from the state about 415 staffing positions. So each of those earned staffing positions, the state will provide us $2,000. If we want to pass that on to every employee that we do not earn from the state, we'll have to fund that out of our local revenue. The state is also passing on teacher training and experience funding, which we call T&E, and that is for step increases for the staff that we earn, as well as teachers that may have earned additional certifications. I mentioned that they are rolling out that increased healthcare benefit over the course of 2 years. So this initial year, they are going to supplement us and pay the district or roll out to us about $3.7 million to pay for some of those healthcare benefits. And we'll have to make up that other percent, which I'll show on a slide coming up. And I always like to point out that regardless of what we do, we have to send back to the state 5 mils of our local tax money. So based on what we anticipate earning in our tax revenue, we will have to send back to the state 5 mils of that, which is about $1.2 million. And the state uses this money for something called the equalization grant. The equalization grant is part of the QBE funding formula used at the state level. And what it does is it identifies districts that have a much higher tax base that we could then take that money together as a state, and then they send it to school districts to help fund school districts that may not have as much funding opportunities from their local tax base. So we're anticipating an increase in our state revenue of about $4 million. And then we're also projecting an increase in our local tax base revenue by about 6%, which will bring in an additional about $3 million there. So what I want to do is kind of look at the overall projections. So compared to where we were, what we have budgeted for this year, and what we are anticipating for FY24. So for local taxes, as I mentioned, we're anticipating that increasing about $3 million or 6%. Other local taxes, those are, they pretty much stay steady or they go up in a small amount. These don't typically decrease, but they did in COVID because this is a sale of alcohol tax and car registration. So local tax, we do consider those to grow at a small level, but usually we anticipate them just staying the same for budgeting purposes. As I mentioned, we do anticipate our state revenue increasing by about $4 million. Our other state revenue is a categorical area that has to be spent within and of itself. We anticipate that to stay the same. So anticipate our total revenue next year reaching about $93.4 million. So that's what we're anticipating for revenue. I want to talk through what we are projecting for just initial expenditures based on where we are. So our current budget, the FY23 budget, we use that as our base. And our projected expenditures this year are $87.8 million. If the board agrees to pass on $2,000 to every staff member, we are getting $1.5 million from the state for that, but we would have to supplement it to a total of $2.2 million. And then the state healthcare benefits from the state, we are getting that $3.7 million, but we do have to contribute on our own about $700,000. So to pay for all of the healthcare benefits for all of our staff, we'll have to pay out about $4.4 million, which brings our projected revenues just for funding the salaries and benefits for current personnel. This is not adding a single person to our school system. We're looking at our projected expenditures just to cover those current staff to be $94.4 million. So as we look at our projected revenues versus projected expenditures, we are projecting, as I mentioned, our revenues to be $93.4 million, and that our projected expenditures for maintaining just current staffing at $94.4 million, which will require the board to agree to pull just under $1 million out of the fund balance to pay for those. So I did mention we do get budget requests every year, and this is a summary of all the budget requests that were submitted. And the great thing about having a strategic plan in place is we can categorize and prioritize based on those strategic accelerators about what needs to move forward first. So we categorize all the budget requests based on the strategic accelerators, and you can see what requests have been made here in all of these. I do want to point out that for the cultivating and retaining quality professionals, this is the highest, but $6.6 million of this fund is paying the $2,000 raise for all staff and also increasing the amount that we have to pay for benefits. So that this number looks really high, but 6.6 of it is just passing on that raise if that's done, as well as the $2,000, the raise of $2,000 and the increased healthcare costs. So if all of the things are funded through the budget requests that were requested through the budgeting process, that would increase our expenditures by about $12 million. And that is what the board will be discussing at the upcoming work session. So just so you can have a calendar of what's coming next for the budget, we did our initial budget projections for the board last week on the 14th. They'll be doing a second look at budget priorities and requests next Tuesday at the work session. And there's a survey out there for community members to complete to help the board be informed about what the community thinks should be prioritized. So hopefully you have that link and you can complete that information. April 18th, the board will do a tentative approval of the FY24 budget. And then on May 9th, the board will do the final approval of the FY24 budget, as well as set the tentative millage rate on May 9th. We are not at this time recommending a millage rate increase to the board, but we are looking at, is there an opportunity, or are we comfortable as a governance team pulling some additional funds out of the fund balance to pay for any of these initiatives that we feel would be necessary. And then in June, we haven't set the dates yet, but we will hold our millage rate hearings at that time. So I want to thank you for being here today and listening in to our presentation. And I am going to look at the questions that have come in. So there's a good question here about determining success. How are we measuring these outcomes and baselines and moving forwards and backwards? And that's a great question. And that is going to be identified through looking at those priority student outcomes. So we've already started identifying the baseline. Once the groups start coming together to really look at what's happening, test scores, student grades, attendance, survey results, we'll be using those baselines. And once the baselines are set, we'll be setting our goals for what we want to improve and how we are going to move that work forward. So there were a couple questions about that. There's another question about increasing student wellness. So the question about student wellness, let's see. So when we talk about increasing student wellness, we measure that through the Georgia Health Survey. So that is, we are able to measure student wellness. We are able to share that data. That is part of our current district improvement plan. And it will be transitioning that information into our strategic plan. Okay, maybe feedback opportunity for those in person. Effectiveness of this presentation. If you have any recommendations on the effectiveness of this presentation, I would love to have your feedback. Feel free to send me that information. Would love to hear that. Another question about building to impact. Quite a year ago. It's a great question. Why would we want to use the 5D implementation book? And the answer for that is we really have seen these experts have put together a lot of research. Yes, it was just published, but they have been doing this research and based it on other proven implementation models. So I feel very confident that this is a good model to move us forward. And the 4 authors of this are known worldwide for helping schools really identify the best ways to move forward. So great question. So a good question about who will oversee the impact. The superintendent. So that is the main job of the superintendent, to monitor and oversee the implementation of this plan and moving towards the student success objectives. As you saw, the project management tools and the dashboards, those are things that I will be reviewing with my administrative team on a regular basis. And then we will use the big strategic plan to help our principals develop their own school improvement plans so that we can monitor those as well. So some great questions. All right, well, those are all the questions that were, educators. So yeah, educators were involved in this process all the way through. So we were very intentional the whole way through about involving our teachers in the classroom, even to the point when we were building the action plan. Each of the action teams had educators that are working in the classroom helping build these plans. So we were intentional about involving educators the whole way through. And then as the schools and the principals develop their school improvement plan, they'll be identifying, hey, here's where we are, here's where we're ready to go next, so that it does fit for each school. Sustainabilities. Yes, we have a lot of work to do with the sustainability projects. That is going to be Sergio Perez and his department. And he'll be sharing out kind of probably before the end of this school year, what his next steps are and how he's going to start moving those initiatives forward. And one of those will be a dashboard that he's creating so that people can track how much diesel fuel do we use? How are we moving forward with reducing cost of our carbon footprint? How many solar panels do we have? So he does have a range of things that he's already working towards to increase the transparency of our energy costs and our carbon footprint. And he'll be working with a community group as well as a team that he's going to have, an advisory team to help him move that work forward. So we're excited about that. How much is the fund balance? Mention has it grown. So the fund balance fluctuates over time. The state says that our fund balance has to be between 4 and 15%. So that fund balance of 4 and 15%, it has maintained that level as long as I can remember. Now, before, probably like 3 or 4 years ago, the fund balance was really, really high, higher than it really needed to be. It was over 20% of our budget. And through COVID, we intentionally brought that fund balance down to what is an acceptable level. Right now, our fund balance is sitting at about 10%. And for me, that's the sweet spot with the fund balance. 10% is about where you want to keep it. If you're bringing in too much revenue, you're not spending enough, you're going to see your fund balance either go up or down. So my desire is to keep the fund balance at about 10%. I think when we look at unexpected expenditures, like a massive increase to our cost of healthcare for employees, that's an opportunity to have a conversation of, what are things we could cut from our current budget to start moving funds towards that cause? Is this an opportunity to take the fund balance down for a little bit, maybe a little bit lower than that nice 10%? So that's what we're going to be talking about through the next couple sessions with the board. Okay, those were great. Any other questions? I want to thank everyone for being here today. As I mentioned, you're always welcome to send me an email, excuse me, or let me know if you've got additional questions. I'm always happy to answer those. So thank you again for being here today. Have a great afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your week.